At 11:11 p.m. on December 31st, 2025, Ukrainians across 7 regions were counting down to midnight. In Lutsk, Odessa, and Chernihiv, families gathered around tables laden with New Year's traditions. But 400 kilometers away, in Primorsko-Akhtarsk, Russian drone operators were launching the first wave of what would become one of 2025's most devastating attacks. Over 200 Shahed 136 drones lifted off within a 90-minute window, each carrying 50 kilograms of high explosive toward Ukrainian energy infrastructure, Euronews global banking and finance. Unknown to the air defense crews preparing for the holiday, this wasn't going to be a typical mass strike. The Russians had spent months studying Ukraine's defensive patterns, and tonight they were implementing lessons learned from a year of failures. The assault involved 205 attack drones RBC Ukraine, but the number told only part of the story. Each Shahed flew at 185 kilometers per hour, cruising altitude between 1,500 and 3,500 feet, following pre-programmed GPS waypoints that had been updated hours earlier by Russian reconnaissance satellites. The flight time from launch sites to targets ranged from 3.5 to 4.5 hours, giving Ukrainian air defense operators a narrow window to detect, track, and engage threats spread across a 600-kilometer front. The mathematics of air defense create brutal choices. Ukraine's mobile systems, Gepard guns, NASA-MS batteries, Soviet-era S-300 launchers maintain coverage across the entire country, but coverage doesn't equal protection. Each system carries limited ready ammunition. A Gepard holds 640 rounds split between two 35mm cannons. A NASAMS launcher has 6 missiles. When 200-plus drones approach simultaneously across multiple vectors, the equation becomes impossible. Engagement prioritization becomes triage. Which targets get intercepted? Which facilities get protected? The answers to these questions would determine how millions of Ukrainians started their new year. At 0:23 a.m. on January 1st, radar operators at Air Defense Command near Kyiv watched their screens populate with contacts. The first wave approached from the southeast, 37 drones in loose formation, altitude varying between 2,000 and 3,000 feet. But something was wrong with the pattern. Half the contacts were heading toward obvious targets: substations, transformer yards, generation facilities. The other half were flying toward empty fields and forest clearings 20 kilometers from anything of value. Senior Lieutenant Marchenko commanded a Gepard position to defend infrastructure northwest of Kyiv. His radar acquired the first targets at 14 kilometers. Standard engagement profile: wait until 4 kilometers, achieve lock, engage with sustained burst until target destruction. At 0:27 a.m., he opened fire on the lead drone. The twin 35mm cannons hammered out 180 rounds in 8 seconds. The Shahed disintegrated in a fireball that briefly turned night into day. Then another and another. In 11 minutes, his crew destroyed 6 drones and expended 890 rounds of their ready ammunition. What Marchenko couldn't see was the pattern. While he engaged decoys packed with radar reflectors and aluminum chaff designed to look identical to armed drones on radar, the real attack was splitting into 3 distinct groups 80 kilometers away. Northern group targeting Volyn region near the Polish border. Central group aimed at Chernihiv region north of Kyiv. Southern group programmed for Odessa's port and energy infrastructure, global banking and finance. 104.1 WIKY. Each group flew different altitudes, different speeds, exploiting the geometry of air defense coverage to create gaps Ukrainian systems couldn't close. At 0:47 a.m., the northern group reached Volyn Oblast. The region sits several hundred kilometers from the front line and borders NATO member Poland, global banking and finance. 104.1 WIKY, making it a seemingly safe location for critical infrastructure. That calculation was about to prove catastrophically wrong. The lead Shahed approached a transformer substation outside Lutsk at 185 kilometers per hour, flying at 800 feet to stay below optimal radar coverage. Plant security spotted it visually and sounded alarms, but the facility had no organic air defense. That responsibility belonged to a mobile Gepard unit positioned 12 kilometers away. The Gepard crew had 4 minutes to respond. They needed to relocate, achieve radar lock, and engage before the drone reached the substation. The ZSU-23-4 Shilka, that should have provided backup coverage, was dealing with its own targets 30 kilometers north. The calculation was simple and impossible. Travel time 8 minutes, engagement window closing in 4. At 0:51 a.m., the first Shahed impacted substation 330 kilovolts Lutsk north. The explosion wasn't dramatic, 50 kilograms of high explosive against a massive transformer installation. But explosives don't need drama when applied correctly. The blast ruptured the transformer's cooling system, releasing thousands of liters of mineral oil that ignited instantly. The fire spread through cable conduits to adjacent equipment. Within 90 seconds, 3 transformers were burning. Over 3,000 households lost power. 104.1 GWh Ukraine as the substation's output dropped to 0. But the attack on Volyn wasn't finished. 7 drone impacts were recorded at a locomotive depot in Koval, RBC, Ukraine, targeting rail infrastructure critical for moving equipment and supplies. The drones had been programmed to hit specific buildings, maintenance shops containing specialized repair equipment that couldn't be quickly replaced. Each impact was precise, deliberate, surgically removing capabilities Ukraine needed to sustain military logistics. 200 kilometers south in Odessa, the situation was deteriorating in parallel. The southern group had split into smaller formations, each targeting different nodes in the port city's infrastructure network. Regional head Ole Kuiper reported multiple waves of drone attacks Euronews, with Shaheds approaching from different directions to complicate air defense response. The attacks targeted power substations feeding the port facilities, attempting to cripple the infrastructure Ukraine relied on for grain exports and military supply. A Gepard crew defending Odessa's northeastern approaches engaged the first wave at 1:04 a.m. Their radar tracked 5 contacts inbound at low altitude, flying in a loose V formation that split apart. As they entered engagement range, the lead operator locked the first drone at 5.2 kilometers and opened fire. The 35mm rounds found their mark at 4.1 kilometers. 1 down. But while he engaged that target, 2 more had circled wide, approaching from different vectors that forced the Gepard to reorient its turret, losing precious seconds. The second drone fell at 3.8 kilometers. The third absorbed multiple hits but kept flying, its simple design lacking vital components to destroy. It finally detonated at 2.4 kilometers when a lucky round hit the warhead. 2 drones remained, approaching from opposite sides now, exploiting the Gepard's inability to engage multiple targets simultaneously. The crew chose the closer threat and destroyed it at 3.1 kilometers. The final Shahed flew past their engagement envelope while they reloaded. At 1:09 a.m., that drone impacted a residential building in Odessa. It hit an apartment on the 17th floor of a high-rise without detonating Euronews. The warhead's fusing mechanism had failed, a malfunction that saved dozens of lives but demonstrated how close the margins had become. Across the city, Russian Shaheds struck port logistics infrastructure, RBC, Ukraine, damaging facilities critical for Ukraine's economy. In Chernihiv region, north of Kyiv, the central group was executing its own systematic dismantling of electrical infrastructure. The Energy Ministry reported that a significant number of households were disconnected from power supplies, global banking, and Finance 104.1 WIKY, as drones found their marks on substations and transformer yards. The attacks weren't random. They targeted specific nodes that created cascading failures across the regional grid. By 1:45 a.m., Ukrainian air defense had been fighting for over an hour. Air defense forces shot down most of the enemy UAVs, with impacts by 24 strike drones recorded at 15 locations, RBC, Ukraine. That success rate, roughly 88% interception, sounded impressive until you calculated what it meant. 24 drones reaching their targets, 24 explosions at carefully selected infrastructure points. 24 chances to sever power, destroy transformers, eliminate capabilities. The Ukrainian power grid's automated systems began executing emergency protocols. When multiple nodes fail simultaneously, grid frequency drifts from the standard 50 Hz. Drop too far and generators automatically disconnect to protect themselves, causing cascading blackouts that can devastate entire regions. Grid operators in Kyiv made impossible choices, deliberately shutting down sections to save others. It was national-scale triage. Sacrifice these areas to preserve those. At 2:03 a.m., as the last Shaheds finally fell to interceptors or ran out of fuel and crashed, the damage assessment began. Energy infrastructure in 7 regions across Ukraine had been targeted. Global Banking and Finance 104.1 WIKY. The Volyn attacks had been particularly devastating, knocking out power to over 100,000 households in a region hundreds of kilometers from active fighting. Railway infrastructure from Odessa region to Sumy and Volyn sustained damage RBC Ukraine, with locomotive depots and stations hit by multiple impacts. The Russian operation had cost approximately $4.1 million in drones. Each Shahed 136 carries a price tag around $20,000. Cheap by military standards, especially compared to the million-dollar missiles Ukraine expended to intercept them. But cost wasn't the relevant metric. The relevant metric was effect. A substation transformer weighs hundreds of tons and requires specialized manufacturing, with lead times measured in months or years. Ukraine had no stockpiles of spare transformers. Soviet-era equipment couldn't be replaced off the shelf. It needed to be custom manufactured or salvaged from mothballed facilities. The locomotive depot damage in Kovel impacted Ukraine's ability to maintain rail equipment critical for moving troops and supplies. The port infrastructure hits in Odessa threatened grain export capabilities that generated revenue Ukraine desperately needed. The attack had been choreographed with mathematical precision. By launching over 200 drones simultaneously across a 600-kilometer front, Russia forced Ukrainian air defense into impossible choices. Protect Kyiv or protect Volyn? Defend power infrastructure or defend rail logistics? Save the transformer yard or save the residential area? The mathematics ensured that even with an 88% interception rate, enough drones would reach their targets to achieve strategic effect. At 4:15 a.m., as dawn broke over Ukraine on the first day of 2026, emergency crews fought transformer fires, while engineers calculated how to maintain hospitals and water treatment with degraded power capacity. President Zelensky emphasized that Russia's holiday season attacks showed Ukraine could not afford delays in air defense supplies, global banking, and finance, calling for equipment his Western allies had promised. On January 1, 2026, 24 drones found their marks. 24 explosions that left hundreds of thousands of Ukrainians in darkness as they welcomed the new year.